Hello, everyone. Welcome to Beyond Live Paranormal Podcast. I'm your host, Russell Reynolds, and we got a good show tonight. We got an interesting guest with us. I got to meet her last weekend when we did an investigation for Ken 10 Paranormal's birthday at the Glen House in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. What an awesome place it was. We had some good activity. Kind of died down a little bit about midnight with activity, but we still got some pretty good evidence and some activity. We're still going through it. There is a video out with it. If you check out Ken 10 Paranormal's page, you will see our investigation with Ken 10 and some of the rooms and the Estes method. There's some videos on my page, Beyond Live Paranormal Research Missouri, Cold Spotters Missouri, and where we were live. So before we get in the show and bring our guest on, want to plug an event real quick. Mother's Day, May 9th, we will be in Toledo, Ohio at Mortuary Manor. So get your VIP tickets to come investigate with my dad and I, the cousins of the Warrens, and you'll be able to check out stuff we do, and even you new people, be a good experience to learn from us too. So get your tickets. Maybe it be your mom's very first paranormal investigation. Why not buy her a ticket for Mother's Day? So we hope to see you all out there May 9th. And before we get into the show, let's say hi to everybody in the chat. Nelson, welcome in. Glad you could join us. I hope you enjoy the show. Cameron, hope you enjoy the show. Hi, everybody else that's out there. So we're going to go ahead and introduce our guest. Our guest is the lead tour guide, and she runs the Glen House here in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. If you get a chance, make sure you guys take the tour of that place. It's remarkable, the craftsmanship. She runs all the tours there. She was nice enough to let us come in and investigate with Ken 10, and we actually had an awesome time and can't wait to do it again. So without further ado, we're going to bring our guest on instead of keeping her backstage for very long. Here's our guest, Christy, that's in charge of the Glen House.
Hi, how are you this evening?
Good. How are you?
Good. It's a snowy night
I hear
here
you.
in Cape Girardeau, but glad
We're
to come and visit with you a bit.
we're getting it here too. We've got probably about 5.5 inches already, and it's still snowing here.
I started to say we're supposed to, I think, get the worst of it overnight tonight.
Yeah.
But it's a good night to be here doing this, right? Like
Right. Yeah.
instead of out in the snow.
Especially with it being -1 out. So
Right. Definitely glad you guys came last weekend. It was cold, but it wasn't quite as cold as it is today. So
oh yeah, we had a ball. I mean, we had some good activity for a while there until about midnight. Then it slowed down for us. Nothing was really going on, but Kent and us, we had some pretty good responses on Estes, and Garrett, he didn't want to talk to Kent, but he wanted to talk to me.
oh, well, that's a good thing, I guess. I know you guys were super interested in following up on some things from previous investigations. So,
Yep, and I got talking about cars with him, and he seemed to be more responsive when I started talking about cars.
well, they were one of the first two families. There was a little bit of a dispute about who had a car first, but they were very, very early sort of technology adopters, and he was very interested in new technology. So that sort of tracks with the history of the family.
And I got telling him that I used to race, and my dad and I built race cars and stuff like that. So it seemed to really kick him up on some of the equipment when we started talking to him.
Well, I mean, it would track that would have been a subject, or, vehicles, cars, technology, new things, would have been things that they would have been interested in just by the historical things that we know about the family.
So tell the audience, because I know my viewers aren't familiar with the Glen House, some of the history of the place.
Sure. So the house was built in the 1880s. It was a dowry present, so a wedding gift by a prominent local architect here in Cape Girardeau for his daughter. Her name was Lula Dean, when she married a guy by the name of David Glenn. David Glenn came here from Eastern Kentucky. So, some of your viewers are from that area. He had family members here, and at that time, he was coming to work in their saloons. Not really sure how he met Lula, because she would have been a girl of, kind of society at that time. But they did meet, and it was lucky for David because he ended up with a house. The house was unusual in that even though it was the 1880s, it ended up being deeded to Lula. I say that's unusual because women didn't usually own property back then.
Right.
Um, so, and that became important. David made money on his own. His father in law certainly helped to invest in some business ventures. He was a partner in the First National Bank. The Glens went on to own a Glen Mercantile. And then when an announcement was made that the World's Fair was going to be in St. Louis in 1904, David and some friends partnered together to create a short line railroad that would take people to the fair. That was a huge thing if you think about what it would have been like in just a 2-year time span to try to build a railroad from the state line to
Hmm.
St. Louis. I mean, that's a huge undertaking. So it's kind of remarkable that they managed to do it, but they weren't exactly safe in how they did it. And afterward, there were some lawsuits. In those lawsuits, David Glenn ends up being the primary person named, and Lula's ownership of the house becomes really important because David argues that yes, he can lose his businesses, he can lose other assets that he has, but he can't lose his house because it doesn't actually belong to him, it belongs to his wife. So that goes all the way, I believe, to the Missouri State Supreme Court, who then find that Lula as a woman and all of her property belonged to her husband, and the house is lost in bankruptcy. That story becomes the base, we think, of a lot of our ghost stories today, because it sort of seems like Lula never left, the
Hmm.
family never left. But the house, of course, went on to have a whole history. They lost that house in 1913. There was a doctor who briefly lived there. There were some other prominent folks. And then by the 1960s, it had fallen into pretty bad disrepair, was purchased by the Erlbacher family, who owned the dry docks and the Mississippi River Barge Company. And they then donated it to become a museum. So no one has lived in the house since the mid 1960s because it's been a museum, opened up as a museum in 1974. I say all of that stuff because in the house itself are 50 years of history and items. So, you all, when you visited, were interested in some of the items. Those include some human hair wreaths. They include a bunch of Civil War artifacts from the Erlbacher collection, river artifacts, memento mori photography, so things that in and of themselves, I know there are some people that believe that objects can be haunted
Hmm.
as well. So, we not only have sort of that tragic story of the Glenn family, but we have all this stuff that sort of has its own history and its own life. And we have a lot of ghost stories. So.
So, what are some of the paranormal experiences that you've experienced yourself being in the house by yourself?
Oh gosh, I think I said in my bio, I was, as you can probably tell, I'm much more of a nerd than a paranormal investigator. So I was really late to this party of believing in ghosts. I started as a volunteer in the house when I was a student. back in the 1990s. Didn't have any experiences until about probably 2015 or 16 myself. The very first experiences that I had were pretty common to the house. The house has a bell system. There are little bells that you can push. There's one under the dining room table. There's some in various rooms that could be used to summon the servants. And the bells always sort of had a mind of their own. So, the bell system at that time works pretty well, and we'd use it in tours, but you'd be alone in the house and the bells would go haywire. And so I had some experiences with those bells, but I chalked it up to the fact that the wiring's about 100 years old, kept kind of ignoring all of that. And then one night I was there doing a paranormal investigation with a group of folks. And I was just there, like I would have been with you all, to sort of open the
Mhm.
house and be there. And there was a group coming in, and the paranormal investigation group that year was not from our area. So they came in, they arrived at the house about 5 o'clock in the evening. I went in the back door with them. We only had one door open. We walked through the house together, and they were looking for like plugins to plug equipment in. They took some baseline temperature readings. They took some still photographs. They sort of did a general catalog of where stuff was in the house. And then they weren't slated to start their investigation until a little bit later, and they were hungry because they'd driven a ways. So we all left the house together. And they went and grabbed something to eat. I went and grabbed a drink. We came back. I waited for them outside because kind of standard protocol. We don't go back in, alone.
Mhm.
And so they come back. We go back in the same door that we had gone out. I had locked the house. So they were there with me when I unlocked it. Walk through the kitchen and the butler's pantry. And the very first thing I noticed when we got into the house itself was that all of the interior doors seemed to be shut, which was weird, right? We don't really shut those interior doors, but
Mhm.
there's some pocket doors between the dining room and the front parlor, some doors going out into the hallway. The house has a lot of doors. And they were all shut. And I thought, oh, that's just weird, right? But that day, it was October, it had turned kind of cold. There had been an older tour guide there. And a long time ago, and I'm talking like the 70s, 80s, I knew that they used to have a protocol at night where they would shut those inside doors. And in my head, I thought she must have come back, like forgotten a coat,
Mhm.
something. And when she did, she closed all these doors. So I actually ended up calling. Another volunteer was there, and she made the phone call for me just to ask because it had bothered me so much. I wanted to know, had she come back? Had she closed the doors? And she had not. And so that was odd, but probably wouldn't have been in and of itself that big of a deal. But the group that was there that night, we ended up having a huge issue with the bell system. The bells just kept going off to the point where I had to shut off the power to the entire house, and the bell system was still ringing. So the combination of the closed doors and the bells that wouldn't turn off when the power was turned off to the system
Right.
was enough to kind of make me think, okay, maybe there's something in the house. That's now been, many years ago, but I have told people over the years that's a very short version of a long story of an evening, but it was almost like once, like a little kid, once they know you're paying attention, they
Right.
sort of escalate. So the years since then, the house, it was almost like you see me and now I'm going to show you what I can do. I told you all in the last year, some of the things that have happened had been a little more flashy than old stories. About a year ago, I went in on a Monday afternoon. I had a lady who had called, and her mom was in town from another state and wanted to know, because we're not usually open on that day, if she could bring her in for a tour. And so I met her at the house at about 4 o'clock on a sunny Monday afternoon. I noticed when I went to turn the alarm off at the back, the alarm was acting a little bit weird. I had a hard time getting the door open. We always walk through that kitchen,
Mhm.
butler's pantry, into the dining room. And when I got in the dining room, I saw that the light was on in the front, the red room, the one with the piano. And I thought, I bet that when I was trying to open that back door, I bet it wasn't locked. So when I put my hand on the key panel, I locked it, in my head. You make up
Mhm.
logical reasons.
Yep.
So I thought somebody else is here, and I just didn't realize it. So I yell in the house, "Hey, I'm coming in. I've got a tour. I don't want to scare you." Nobody answered me. As I was walking across the dining room, I heard the Edison machine in that room start playing, and I thought, "Oh, definitely somebody's in there, right?" So I'm like, "Hey," walk through the house, look in the front parlor. There's nobody in there. I didn't have time to really think about it because these two ladies were on the front porch and they had seen me walk in. They were looking in the door. So I went and unlocked the door, set my stuff down, yelled up the staircase because I thought, okay, and started these ladies on their tour. So we started in that music room, and I explained the Edison machine, and I said, "Someone must be here," turned it off. And they said, well, they'd heard it kick on from outside. And I thought, that's weird. But
Mhm.
Edison machines, of course, work on a spring system, kind of like an old music box, right?
Yeah.
And I thought, well, maybe somebody just didn't turn it all the way off, and it just had enough pressure built up that it was playing. Like I said, you kind of come up with really good explanations when you don't want it to be something paranormal. So, I still didn't really think a ton of it. Walked into the room across the hallway, the one that's got the green wallpaper, and I'm showing them the picture of Mr. Dean, the architect of the house. I've got my back to the dining room, and the mother was leaning up against the doorway. There's the pocket doors. And from behind me, I hear her say, "Is that normal?" And I turned around, and the light fixture over the dining table was swinging back and forth like a pendulum. I've never seen it do that before. I haven't seen it do it since. So I kind of looked at her and I said, "No, ma'am, that is a new trick. That's not normal." So I stood there a minute, and again, we're not a haunted attraction, right? So you try to logically think what could cause it. There was a window unit air conditioner on in the room. And so as I was standing there, it was on full blast. And I thought, oh, there's my explanation, right? It's catching
Yeah.
somehow. So I go across the room, I turn the window unit off and turn back around, and I stop and look at the light fixture, and I think it's slowing down. So I'm like, ah, there's my logical explanation. And as I turn to walk back to the two ladies, we clearly hear upstairs in what would be Lula's room the sound of somebody with like a hard soled shoe clicking, walking across the floor, like to where the end of the bed would be, and turning around and walking back. The two ladies, when they saw that the light fixture was moving, they had taken out phones and started recording because that's kind of what everybody does these days,
Yeah.
right? And they actually put that video, they tagged the Glen House. So if somebody wants to go out and look, they can find it. You can hear those footsteps and you can see the light fixture
Mhm.
swinging, of course. Um, but it was clear enough. Like it wasn't like it could have been footsteps. When you were standing there, it was footsteps. And it made me uncomfortable at that point enough that I thought there might have been a person in the house with us. Like any community, in a museum that doesn't have someone stay on site, we'd always worry that we could have people break in or
Right.
So I actually called. We're very close to Southeast Missouri State's arts campus, and one of my board members works there. And it was before 5, so I actually called him to see if he would come over really quickly, just so we weren't alone in the house and could walk through. People have asked me why didn't I call, the police if I thought there was someone there. You have to understand that we have enough occurrences like this that if I called the police all the time, they probably wouldn't be super happy with us.
Right.
Um, we have enough issues because the house has an alarm system, and I probably am talking to the police department once a week or so. Well, even you all had a weird thing with the alarm as we
Yeah.
were moving.
Yep.
So, you don't want to overreact, but also when you've got guests in the house, you don't want them to be unsafe either. These ladies, God love them, were super intrigued at that point. They did not come to the house because of the haunted history, the mother likes history. But of course, once the light fixture was swinging and they
Yep.
were very interested, as people tend to be. I was trying to get them out of the house to make sure we were safe, and they were like, "No, we want to see." But Jeff made it over in about probably under 5 minutes. And we walked through the house, we looked everywhere. There was not a person anywhere in the house. I went back because we do have an alarm system. And I know some of your folks are investigators, so they like these details.
Yep.
We looked at the alarm logs, so there hadn't been anyone in the house for several days. Even though it was a Monday, that was not when we in our normal tour season. So no one had been there over the weekend. There was no log of a motion sensor triggering, which a person should have triggered the
Yep.
motion sensors. Normally, even when the alarm is off, I get motion triggers when people are in the house, right? You can kind of see as people move from room to room. There was nothing like that on the alarm system. And again, I know I sound like I'm pretty blasé about it, but that stuff happens enough. But that's kind of our litmus test for, like, is it a person or is it just another sort of weird thing that has happened?
Right.
What was kind of crazy about all of that is when the lady called me to set up that tour, I was actually in New Orleans with a friend. And so this woman called and I said, I'm not in town. I will be back on Monday if your mom will still be there. And it wasn't long after that that the alarm triggered in the house. And so I thought, well, that's weird. I can see everything on my phone. Um, and so I had disarmed everything. And I have a good friend that used to work with me at the university. And about 15 minutes after that alarm call, he called me. He had ridden his bike over to the house with his grandsons because, like, the night before, they had watched on TV the Glen House episode of Ghost Hunters was on. So they
Yep.
had watched it and they thought it would be fun because it was kind of a nice spring day to ride their bikes over, and he was going to walk around the outside and show them the house. He was calling me again, remember I'm sitting on in New Orleans. He was calling me because all of the upstairs, when you're standing in the backyard and
Hmm.
you look at the upper deck, all of the doors on the upstairs were open. So that would be the door to the nursery, the
Hmm.
backstairs door, the one to Lula's room, servants' quarters. What's kind of crazy about that is we very, very rarely open that door to the nursery. There's furniture in front of it usually, right? So even if tour guides had been in and somebody forgot the doors, it, like, for those to be open. But the other part was, even though the alarm had triggered, it allowed me to turn it off and reset it, and it wasn't showing me that the doors were open.
Wow.
And so Danny has retired, my friend, and he owns a boxing gym for young men, a Christian boxing academy. And so he's not afraid of things and he can pretty much hold his own. And I said, Danny, I hate to ask this, but if I turn the alarm off and open the back door for you, would you mind going in and checking it out? Because that's really odd. And will you just make sure there's nothing out of place or what have you? So Danny's like, sure. And of course his grandsons, now these
Mm.
kids are like, oh, we're going in the haunted house. And so he's on the phone with me and he goes in and he's a fairly faithful man. He goes in and on the first floor everything's fine and he starts to walk up the stairs and he starts to pray and he's on the phone with me and he said there's something not right. And I said, well, I said, not right, like have things been moved, is it out of place? And he said, no ma'am, everything looks fine. And he said, but it was cold in the upstairs and it just felt weird to him. So he said some prayers. He closed and locked all the doors for me. He thanked me later because he said his grandsons had the time of their life. But he did say it just felt
Right.
funny to him in there. Odd enough that he, as a faithful man, he just felt like if he said a prayer, and he said he wasn't worried about it because, between his faith and his boxing training, he wasn't concerned that something was going to get him. But anyway,
Right.
that's just one of those stories. I've been involved with the house now for so many years that I have so many of those stories. We don't have a lot of like the super flashy. People have seen someone on the staircase. They've seen a gentleman in the butler's pantry as you come in. They felt things. They've had
Mm.
tugs on clothing. In the children's room, people have felt touches like low, kind of like a child. We've got a number of things caught on video and audio that are strange, and of course, we've had probably 100 or more groups like, come in over the years, and most all of them have some story to tell. Again, not a lot of flashy stuff. Might be a temperature change or smell or a door or
Right.
noise. Um, but it is enough that even for someone like me, when you try to put the logical explanations, I've said when your logical explanations become more fanciful than just saying the house might be haunted, you have to kind of admit that there might be something else going on.
Right.
So,
And I know when we Kent cut those eyes on the thermal that read like 86 degrees, and that was over in the blue room, and we interpret that was not a good entity, so we did our thing to get rid of it. My dad actually came face to face with it. He saw it. And in Kent's video, his son ended up filming it. And as I'm reading off the perimeter prayer to protect the house from that thing coming back in, you see the black shadow go right dark behind me. And Kent's other boy was sitting in the green room at the table and he heard the dining room doors move. I went to go outside to the car to get something and the back kitchen door was wide open.
ugh. See, and I hadn't followed up with you guys. Normally when a group comes in, we give you guys time to sort of go through all of your investigation because it's hard to see, I know, what you've gotten or what you
Mm,
think you might have. So I hadn't heard a whole lot. I did have a conversation with you all because we have had some different sorts of things over the last couple of years. We have evolved some pretty strict rules for folks that come into the house, and you have been with me. I usually have a conversation, or if I'm not there, I have someone to be there. We don't allow taunting of spirits. We don't like Ouija boards, and we're very careful
yep.
about the types of behavior that we allow investigators in the house. And the best thing that I can say to people if they're not familiar is it's like I wouldn't want you to come into grandma's house and tick her off and then leave me with grandma.
Exactly.
So and because we are a historical site and a museum first, we have noticed that if we don't monitor the behavior of the people that do investigations, that we have problems when those folks leave. There has seemed to be something different going on, and it was my sort of concern that somebody, when one of us wasn't in the house with them, had violated one of those rules, and
Hmm.
maybe because and other folks have talked to me about too, because people come in investigation groups with different theories and thought processes, and some people ask why we don't try to eliminate every entity from the house, cleanses and those sorts of things.
Right.
That's a hard one too, because I think most of us that have a long-standing relationship do have a belief that there's something very tied to the family, and that's their place and space.
Exactly.
So it's hard to want to drive that out, if that makes sense. But you just notice when there's a different feeling, and there had been a different feeling for about the last couple of years in
Hmm.
that upstairs. So
Yeah,
if that,
it felt
yeah,
heavy when we were there, and even Eric from Bluff City was saying that when they were there the last time, it felt heavy.
it's I think, because I also do, oh, through my experiences at the Glen House, I do ghost tours there, but I've also started doing historical ghost tours, more haunted history type stuff in
Hmm.
Cape. Um, I've taken people to other haunted locations, and have worked with different groups doing different stuff to set stuff up. The thing I think is different to me about the Glen House is, it most people sort of note that it feels very full, like,
Hmm.
it feels occupied by more of a family, right? As compared to most other places you go, with the exception of things like Waverly, that of course,
Yeah.
or places that had a lot of people in them. But most other homes like this, you have a single story, or a single occurrence that's pretty repetitive. Or we have people who experience lots of different things in lots of different spaces, and enough folks that have come in have sort of remarked on the same thing. Like, it's almost like, oh, if people have familiarity with the movie The Others, it's like there's a family that lives there in a different timeline,
Yeah.
and they just don't understand why you're in their space. Um, and as crazy as that sounds, that's kind of the best explanation. We, as the folks who care for the house and what have you, we don't necessarily want to drive those people that belong to the house
Right.
away.
Yep.
Um, so some folks come in and they just sort of want to do the equivalent of spiritual napalm,
Right.
and we just have been reluctant to do that. So if you were able to help us with the thing that doesn't belong, that's wonderful, because we hadn't really found a solution for that yet.
Yeah, we got rid of that. Everything else is still in place. The family's still there because we were still getting after we did that. We were still getting activity from the family itself in the home, and like how my dad, Kent, our approach was to it. We introduced ourselves. We said we're your guests in the home as a
Yeah.
respect for them because we're in their space. So we showed them that we're not a threat. We're your guests, and we just want to talk to you.
Well, and that's very appreciated by the board, because again, when there have always been ghost stories about this house, but I've told people over the years it used to not be socially acceptable. So even back when I was first, a student, and coming to the house, those folks that were stewards of the space would sort of whisper about it, but you would never have said that publicly, right?
Right.
And then as we sort of headed into like this century, you saw the popularity of TV shows and podcasts and things, and more people started being open to it. So we started telling the stories more. And really, even from a historical perspective, there's 50 years of community history in the house, in addition to its original historical story. And certainly the ghost stories are a part of that. And I think in the modern sense, so are all of these investigations, right? That people
Mm-hmm.
are curious about it. But it's really hard when you're still trying to walk a fine line, as we're a historical site, right? And we don't want the ghost stories to become everything or
Right.
the main thing. They're a part of this great big history of this house and family and the life that they lived and all of that. Um, so it's really cool when I have groups like yours come in. And it's also great when we have people who also love history, have respect for the families and their stories. And we love working with groups that have that sort of ethic around it.
Yep.
Um, because in a weird sort of way, like the dead are people too, in some,
Yep.
and deserve that same sort of respect. So
That is true. We even had some activity up in the carriage house upstairs in the apartment.
that is a space, I told you guys, we don't have as much activity and it usually feels calmer out there, but it has its own stories. As I told you all when you were there, there was a gentleman who died in that carriage house. And for a while, the house was kind of a no-tell, not really motel. They would have called it a flop house probably back at that time. So if you didn't have a lot of money and needed a place to stay where they didn't record a lot of information, that was what the house had turned
Mm-hmm.
into. And it's my understanding that it was a summertime event when this person died, and they figured it out because of the odor, and then went in, and the body was pretty decomposed. I do not think that that person was ever identified, nor was a cause of death pinned down. Um, and even though that happened, to me, the carriage house has typically felt like a safer spot. I don't feel as much like I'm being
Right.
watched or followed over. But we've definitely had, I told you all about a wedding that we had, and they had a wedding on, I don't, and now remember if it was actually Halloween or the weekend of, and a storm came up, so they had to squish everybody from their tents into the carriage house to do their toast and their cake cutting. So during the toast, when it got quiet, um, and everyone was listening, you can clearly hear, even in their video, footsteps walking up that staircase, because it's a wooden staircase and it
Yeah.
creaks. So in the video, and definitely when you were there, and there was nobody over there, up there. And so that was one of the things that the bride really loved about having had her wedding there, because she was very interested. But it's possible too, because we do a lot of stuff out there that's louder. We have music out there, we do social things and clubs. So if the things that happen out there are more subtle like that, 9 times out of 10, if it hadn't been super quiet because they were doing a toast, nobody would have even heard that.
Right.
So it makes me wonder how often there is activity there. Most paranormal groups are using it as their staging point. They're not investigating out there. So I'm interested to see what you all caught, just because we don't have a lot of folks with evidence from out there. But we
Right.
do know that there are things that happen.
I know my dad, he was sitting downstairs while Kent and his one son and I went upstairs, and he seen somebody come walking through there as we were upstairs investigating.
I laughed because the experiences I've personally had out there. I think I told you all this story. I had a musician out there one Christmas season, and I had been in the house. One of our board members is a compulsive cleaner and organizer, and she had come through and like hyper organized everything, which is awesome. But I needed candles, and the candles weren't where they always are. And so I came out to the carriage house, and I probably said a cuss word. I was like, I can't find this damn candle, you know. And so it was the musician. I think there was one other volunteer and me when I walked in, kind of in a tizzy looking for stuff. And as soon as I said it, there's banquette seating along those windows, you know,
Hmm.
and two doors popped open. And underneath in those banquettes, she had put the candles in little like plastic containers, you know, it was a I would never have found them, but there've been a few incidences like that where you say something or you're looking for something and you speak it out loud. And the carriage house ghost, we just say, is very helpful because it will be things like that, like the doors pop open and there they
Hmm.
are. And you know, historically, that's where the carriage man lived. Although the carriage man didn't die out there, so it would
Right.
it would make more sense that it would be the person that actually died on the property, but you just have to think whoever's out there is listening and engaging, even if we don't
Hmm.
know they're there, and pretty helpful. So, you know,
Right. I
I don't
mean,
know.
we've
Go
caught
ahead.
evidence just by doing a normal conversation like how you and I are talking now. We'll just run a recorder and talk amongst ourselves about stuff, and 9 times out of 10, we usually get responses from the spirits chiming in our conversations.
Well, I told you all, you know, we're in the process of taking Christmas down, and after a while you sort of just feel like it doesn't matter if people outside think you're nuts because you've gone around the bend and you may as well just admit it. But for the most part, most of us that spend time at the Glen House, the house does not like us during the Halloween season. It doesn't.
Hmm.
It is not welcoming to the mourning clothing and exhibitions, to the ghost stories.
Right.
Again, if you truly think that it is the family there, that makes a kind of sense because we're telling their like kind of scandalous family history. They were a Victorian time period people. They wouldn't like the details of their life being shared.
Yeah.
So I mean that makes sense to me. Even though we try to be respectful and we're sort of stirring up that energy. But typically kind of the minute we put Christmas up, the tone of the house will change. And so as much as we can say like it doesn't seem to love Halloween, when we get the house decorated, it's still active, but it's a different kind of active.
Yeah.
It's more of the like people will maybe feel a touch on their back or what have you, but it's like they're hanging out and enjoying the Christmas music and the decorations. And, you know, we have old stories. They used to wrap fall, like fake presents. And upstairs, they'd come in and find presents unwrapped and toys moved. And, you know, like, but all of that stuff is a happier kind of energy. But when we start to take the stuff down, it's like that, like the rest of us. It's like the house gets depressed or like
Right.
kind of pissy because you're taking all the pretty things and
Yeah.
then it's you know, we have a couple of months when we're doing repairs and stuff. So we're not open for tours and there's not as many people. And it's almost like it'll throw a temper tantrum because it's very busy at the Glen House from September through the end of December. And then when you go in January and February while it's closed, you almost get this crabby energy like, where have
Right.
you been? And why did you, you know, and that might be projecting, but that's why I warned you all. I'm like, the house may be a little bit pissy because it goes from busy, busy, busy to now it's kind of ugly. You know, everything's messy and there's no
Right.
one here. But that's just from years of experience. We see that just like how people would react to, why haven't you been visiting?
Right. Maryland
So
Maryland Bast asked, "Where is the Glen House located?"
we are in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, 325 South Spanish Street. So it's on the river, very close to the old Catholic Seminary property, which is now Southeast Missouri State's River Campus. And the first bridge that went across the Mississippi River is right beside us. The main bridge is not very far from us, the new one.
Well, I can agree on the house was a little pissy. I know when we were upstairs, it was Jonathan, myself, and Kent. Kent was under Estes, and we had Eric and those guys came in downstairs. We were having a conversation with Garrett in that room at that time, and then soon as Eric came in downstairs, his whole demeanor just changed. It kind of like he got a little pissy, like
It's
because they walked in like, "What are you doing in here?"
Yeah, it's a bit, and again, I think sometimes, some of us in the tour season, there are about 10 of us that are the primary tour guides. And it's sort of like how you feel about your family members, right? And I told you all, like, sometimes you can walk in. I don't know if you ever visited, your grandparents' house and you walked in the back door and knew grandma was unhappy. Like she didn't even have to turn around. You just
Right,
knew. Um,
right,
there are times when that's the best explanation. You walk in that back door and you think, well, it's going to be one of those days.
yeah,
Um, and then there are times when there's just nothing. Um, and so I wondered what you all, because I will be there with you all as I was, but I try to sort of stay out of the way. Um, and I can be a little bit of a flashpoint to either nothing or everything,
right,
So, but and again, one of the things that even the Glenn family members would say is the Glenn house in the colors, it is restored as it would have been right around the turn of the century. So to us as modern people, the color palettes and stuff are a little dark. Um, it is a beautiful house, but I don't usually have people walk in and say it feels welcoming. It's the creep factor for most modern people of it being a little darker in there, of it, the antiqueness of it. Most people are like, it's a beautiful house, but they wouldn't necessarily want to spend the night there, right?
right.
The Glenn family members, by and large, when they come in, it it's such a different experience for them because they all describe this very like warm, welcoming, they want to stay. And so that also leads me in some ways to think that that energy is very family focused. And we have a problem when they do come and visit us because the house is like super warm and welcoming for investigators that have come in, like when the ghost hunter show was there. They felt like the family would be a flashpoint and they would get more activity. But when the family members were there, they got nothing. The house was like very calm.
Hmm.
But the minute they go away, the house is like you've taken away its favorite toy. And then it gets very, very active. And so, when you're doing things like this, you sort of experiment. And so the week that they were with us, it was like bring the family in, take the family away, bring the family in.
Right,
And time again, that was sort of the response. The family was the calming, like center point for the house. And then when they were gone, it was like bring them back immediately. And the months after they visit, we love having the family visit from different parts of the United States. But man, when they leave, it's like, well, here we go again. So,
yeah. I do remember reading that where they said like the third great granddaughter showed up, And then soon she left, it was just like activity just kicked up.
Ratchets up. I mean, to the point where I, at one point, called Sarah from in the house and said, I know how nuts this sounds, but we had a speakerphone call and I just left her to talk to the house because it was scaring the volunteers, and it's like I don't know how we make it stop. But I don't have any other options, so maybe let's try this. So she was a willing participant and just had a conversation with her ancestors and said, they don't mean you harm, like please quit scaring people. So uh, but the things you'll do, if you had told 20-year-old me that at in my late 40s I would be talking to a haunted house, I would have had myself committed. But you reach that point when you're like, listen, I need a little help here.
Right? And sometimes you have to just to get things to settle down a little
Mhm.
bit because it does after a while, it gets overwhelming.
Well, and it's that once you're looking over your shoulder, and I always try to balance things with, so when I'm doing a ghost tour, um, eh, I will talk to people like from a sociological and a historical standpoint, like things I think that are interesting about the architecture. You have to remember that when that house was built, they were heating with fire. Of course, they didn't have air conditioning.
Yeah.
So there are an extraordinary number of doors because the house has been restored. So every room that you're in, you've got at least two doors, if not more, in and out. Modern people, we don't like that feeling of openness to our back. So usually I'll ask people if they go to a restaurant, do you like to sit with your back to a door, right? Or to an open room? And by and large, we modern people don't like that. If you grew up in one of those houses or you lived during that time period, you would have been used to it. You would have wanted that because if you were heating with fire and a fire broke out or you needed the ventilation, right? But
Right.
to us, that feeling of openness is kind of foreign. When you couple that with like humans are sort of by nature a little bit narcissistic, like we see ourselves in everything around us. And so, especially those like Victorians or painted ladies, when they're new, they're a young lady in the bloom of youth, right? And the porches start to sag and the paint starts to peel.
Mhm.
And whether we consciously or not think it, it makes us think about death and decay. Then you go into those old houses and they have a different smell, right? Even if they're well maintained, you
Yep.
can smell the age. And then you have that feeling of openness and all that stuff together, even in a logical person, can make you very much feel like there's somebody looking over your shoulder or following you around, right? So I try to tell people like there's a natural part of our brains that is automatically wary, and can manufacture things. So I'm always really conscious of like, am I just being hyper focused on it? Or is there actually something there on a given day, right?
Right.
If you spend enough time in the house, you kind of know the difference. But when you go into any old house, that that's a thing, that your brain does to you automatically, and that doesn't necessarily mean a house is haunted. Some of the creepiest places I've been, I don't necessarily know that they were haunted. They just, you had a lot of openness and a door to your back and a big cavernous room or whatever. I've been in cathedrals in Europe that are creepy,
Mhm.
and
Right.
probably not haunted, but just you have that feeling. So, um, but parsing through the difference is why we have people like you guys with equipment doing investigations, right?
Yep. And
So,
I know we did when you were talking to us when we were standing in Garrett's room there and you were talking to us. We I don't know if you noticed the lights actually dimmed out in the room we were in, and then the next room right behind you were the dresses on that mannequin.
No, and I'm sort of immune to it, but that doesn't surprise me. In the summer, sometimes that can be attributed to like kicking on and off of like AC units. But in the winter, of course, we still use the radiators.
Hmm.
So there's no power draw that should be causing that. Um, you
And
know,
that was the only two spots that it did it. I asked my dad; he was sitting down in the green room, and he said the power never dimmed down there at all. None of the lights did.
what's kind of crazy to me about the Glen House as a whole, having had a lot of groups come in, we should, by rights, because we still have old knob and tube, you should have quite a bit of EMF bleed.
Hmm.
I mean, my 1940s house that has been rewired, actually, if I take an EMF detector, will read higher than the fixtures in that house. It's very odd. A lot of folks have remarked on it, and I don't know why. I mean, it's 100+ year old wiring, but it has very little baseline numbers because people have been like, there have been groups that have come in and pulled out multiple pieces of equipment because they don't trust their first readings.
Yeah,
Um, but that is kind of cool because with that really low baseline, it's easy to see, when you have pops on your equipment. But, you know, and for all of that, I tell musicians when they come in, I tell anybody, we've had a number of film crews, anybody with expensive equipment, plug it in at your own risk. And if
right.
you don't have a surge protector, God be with you, because we've had quite a bit of equipment get fried. And some folks with your group have experienced equipment that is battery powered or,
Hmm.
rechargeable gets fried. But it's not from surges that we are reading through the standard electrical.
Yep. Ash Yearbanks asked, "Do you live in the home full time or just run it for investigations?"
It's a museum, so no one lives there on site full time. I am just there when we do regular history tours, we do events, special events, and then when we have tours. So when we have paranormal investigations, so it's empty the majority of the time.
And I know when we were up in that room and you were talking to us, I had watched a shadow out in the hallway past the doorway and then head down towards the stairwell.
It's funny you say that. So we we have a newer board member who this has been her first Christmas on the board, and we we have a lot of Christmas trees. The house is known for its Christmas festivities, and so for over 50 years been doing this over the top Christmas. We have offsite storage units where we store all the trees and decorations and
Hmm.
things that we use. So it's a massive undertaking to get all that stuff loaded in and loaded out. And so this new board member's husband helped us this year for the first time. And he's kind of a big guy, works on oil rigs, so, uh, manly. And he carried a big tree, that big one that's up in the atrium area up for us. And he came back down the stairs and he was pale. And he basically saw what you described, but right in front of him, like cross in front of him and go down the stairs, and it scared him. And again, I'm on a paranormal podcast, and we do a lot of this, and the house is known for that, but we are first and foremost a museum and a community space, right? So he didn't know a whole lot of the ghost stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
that's not really his jam. So, he was just helping his wife with her, you know, old lady Victorian fun stuff, and was not prepared to have an encounter. He did not stay long after that. But
Oh,
we
I
did get
bet.
the big tree moved in, and that was he was very helpful. Um, but that is a challenge, though, when you're operating a space like that that's reliant on volunteers, because there is still a little bit of conflict. A lot of people who live in those historical spaces struggle with the ghost stuff, and we don't manufacture anything for anybody. I mean, if it's happened to you in the house, I promise you, we're not setting something up as a jump scare for somebody. But it's sometimes hard when things like that happen to folks who are just there to tell
Yep.
history stories, to get people that can make peace with it and still want to be volunteers. For some people, it's just too much, and we lose volunteers. So, and I don't
Well,
blame them. There's no shade thrown there.
right. I mean, I work at a haunted school, so and we've got teachers that will not stay past dark in the building. So,
About half of our volunteers won't be in the house at all alone. Um, I walk that fine line. If I have to, I will. But if I can find any way to avoid being there by myself, I'd rather not. It's not because I don't love the place. It's not. It's just
right.
I would just prefer to not be there by myself.
Right. I know that Shadow, he made his presence the second time because Kent had some laser grid tripwire set up on top of the stairs. So if anything passes that laser grid, it emits an alarm, and it ended up setting the alarm off. And Kent ended up watching it go past the tripwires and down the stairs.
And that's that whole, like, the boat room. That room historically never had stories about it, right? Like, that's the room we talked about, that's a new thing.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's where the shadow, that's what our helper saw was coming out of that room. Historically, the stories up there center around the nursery. So children, and those stories are, it's still unsettling to feel something, touch your lower back or pull on your clothing.
Yep.
So it was either that or typically a female presence in the atrium sort of area. The new thing is that from the boat room, more male, masculine. We didn't ever really have, in the 50 plus years of ghost stories tradition that we have, there wasn't really a story of a man in that upstairs area.
Mm-hmm.
The only sort of male presence people ever picked up or talked about, or that was a part of the ghost stories, was in the butler's pantry as you walk in that back kitchen area. But other than that, until the last several years, you don't, there's not really anybody that told those kinds of stories. So, stories on the staircase, that was more like cold winds or maybe a
Mm-hmm.
child, female in the atrium, children in the children's room, a female presence overall in the house, and then a male downstairs in the butler's pantry, and a male presence in the carriage house. Like, that sort of all tracks, but
Right.
the other one's different.
I know on Eric's SLS, we were in the other bedroom where they have the crib and everything, the little toy piano. And Eric went under Estes, and I was sitting there holding his SLS, and I caught a figure like it was climbing the Christmas tree.
Ugh. Well, that's comforting. But a child would.
Yeah, it was small enough in that SLS to be a child. I think like it was probably reaching up there to try to grab one of the ornaments. It was there
So
for a minute and then left.
the children's room used to be very, very, very active. And I will say, and I know the big ghost hunting TV shows are controversial. We had a very positive experience overall with ghost hunters. Um, I thought the world of that crew. I really felt like they tried to do that with a level of integrity.
Mm-hmm.
There was a little bit of back and forth with some of the production side, but the investigative team themselves and they've stayed in touch and they did follow up afterward. It wasn't like they just came in and did a TV show and left. And so the other part of it is they made a genuine effort to connect us with other places that they'd worked with. And they've worked with a lot of museums. And more very reputable museums. If you go to Gettysburg, if you go to, even on a more local, go to places like the Fox Theater, and they now do a ghost tour. So in landmark sites and really significant historical sites, this is becoming more common. And more people, whether they're doing televised things like we've done, or they just have private groups coming in, are doing this. And so there's kind of a network, informal network that they did help connect us with of site management people who have to deal with weird stuff
Yep.
and how they're dealing with it, what they're doing for volunteers, like what their process and procedure for groups coming in to investigate, like all of that kind of stuff. They were very helpful in helping us to connect. But also, I mean, Grant really sort of chewed me out. And in retrospect, not on camera, but in retrospect, I'm thankful for it because eh, honestly, I, you know, eh, I have told folks that have gotten to know me, I'm afraid of the dark. You notice I'm at home in a snowstorm, but there's a lot of ambient light in my house because I'm never in the dark. I really, as much as I tell ghost stories, I never want to be a part of them.
Right.
So it was very hard for me for 20 or so years to acknowledge, like, there's something else in the house, or to talk about it, or to be, outside of the realm of telling you a ghost story, to say, I believe this house is haunted, was really hard. And when he sat down, he's like, what if people walked in your house all the time and refuse to acknowledge you? How would that make you feel? Well, as crazy as it sounds, yeah, it'd tick you off, right? Which was then sort of creating more animosity and sort of more negative experiences for me. The other part of that he talked about was when we sort of found that weird loophole that the house seemed to be comforted by the family, and the place that people were getting scared the most was in the children's room. It was their suggestion that we link the current modern Glenn family with the relatives by keeping updated family pictures
Mm-hmm.
in there. And so you notice there's some modern family pictures like above the radiators and stuff.
Yep.
That was at their suggestion. And I honestly do believe that that helps, because you saw what you saw in equipment. It used to be pretty common to come in. Somewhere in the house right now is an old India rubber ball. You know, the antique rubber balls, like, are real
Yeah.
hard. That damn ball, that ball you'd be downstairs and you'd hear it bounce across the floor upstairs. It would appear and disappear. That little horsey thing on wheels would be out in
Mm-hmm.
the hallway. And, when you've got volunteers, you're like, okay, who's screwing with me? Who's trying to scare me?
Right.
You can't ever track that somebody's not doing it to be ornery or funny. The rocking chair that doll sits in, there were lots of people who would come in for a tour and they would catch video of the rocking chair rocking. Did they rock it themselves to get good video or not? Like, we're not ever going to know some of that.
Right.
But so much of that stuff seems to be calmer with those pictures in there. And so that's one thing I find that more people now, when I started doing tours or whatever, like in the 90s, it would be really unusual that someone would say, my house is haunted, right?
Mm-hmm.
People say that casually now. Probably 75. I know there's a Pew poll that said somewhere around 70% of Americans now believe in ghosts. And,
Yeah.
it's equal almost to the belief in God in this current time. So, like, I think it's more socially acceptable when people talk about it. But it's like, what do you do if something in your house is scaring you or whatever? Just that concept that now when I walk in, I'm like, hey, I'm here. I won't be here long. I'm just coming to dump the,
Right.
water the plants or whatever. And it may just be in my head, but the acknowledgement, the placing of those pictures,
Mm-hmm.
the acknowledging of the family history, it does seem to help.
Yep.
So, you know, and having, you know, a priest come in and do a blessing, not a bad idea. Like, things like what you all were talking about.
Yep. Well, that's like the one school I worked at. The one lady, she used to come in there all hours of the day and come in there at night. She would walk in the door and say, "Hi, I'm here to come work in my room for a little while." And then she wouldn't hear nothing. Everything would be quiet. But if she didn't announce that she was coming in or say anything, then you would hear all sorts of noises. And I mean, I've been up at that place all hours of the night as well. We've actually investigated the place and caught a bathroom door. Somebody inside the bathroom door, you can see the fingers come through the metal door and pull the door open from inside the bathroom.
Ugh. Schools can be creepy. So in all the years here in Cape and doing all the things that I've done, um, I'm really popular every Halloween for TV and news stories and things like that. But I got a call, and it's probably been a decade or so ago now, from an area school, and they had some video, and someone had passed my name along, and I work at the university, my day job, like.
Right.
And so they reached out and they said, like, would you be willing to look at some video? And so I went to their administrative offices, and they had this video clip, and it was during the summer when they do the gloss on all the floors and buff
Mm-hmm.
and do all that stuff.
Yep.
And so it was a downstairs corridor with lockers, and they had cameras. And um, what it looked like is that the custodian had managed to get the gloss on maybe half the floor or whatever, and left the bucket of the gloss stuff and the buffer and some other stuff sitting in the hallway. I'm gonna guess to come back either Monday or the next day and
Right.
finish the other part. And if you've ever picked up one of those buckets, they're
Mm-hmm.
heavy.
Yep.
So, you're watching the security video, and it's just an empty hallway, empty hallway, empty hallway. And you start to think, like, why do they have me looking at this? And all of a sudden, the bucket flips over, and that gloss goes, actually, to come to think of it, it did happen on like a Friday night, because that stuff dries and gets thick. And so
Yep.
that was why they even had gone back and looked at the camera, because it had glopped and dried, and it was a pain in the butt, and they had to, do whatever they have to do to get that all up. And so they went back to look and see who had come in, because it was like kind of vandalism, right? And there is clearly, that's heavy enough. I don't know what you would attach to a string or so. Like, I don't know how you would flip it over without it being obvious. But in the video, nothing else happens. Literally, the bucket just flips over on its own, and there's nothing else.
Right.
And so, and they're watching me watch it. We rewind it, watch it, rewind it, watch it. I'm like, I have nothing. Like, I don't know what you thought I would be able to tell you, but yeah, that's weird as hell. And I don't have an explanation for you.
Right.
Uh, but just stuff like that. So, and that's still one of the more unsettling. I'm like, you could sell that to one of those paranormal TV shows because that's crazy.
Right.
But they have strange things that teachers have reported or whatever. And again, I think the thing that made that so unsettling is it wasn't like lockers slammed. It wasn't, but it was just really like, you know, to hell with that bucket, boom, and that's it.
Right.
So,
Well,
um,
that's like my dad who's watching now. He the one school I worked at, I was a night custodian, so I was there by myself. I was there from like 2:30 to 11 every night. And my first night there, I was just starting to get used to the place, the routine, trying to get the routine down. I was cleaning the fax home ec room. I decided to go to dinner. Well, I come back. I had shut the door. It was locked. I come back. The door's open. High school bathroom boys lights on. So I thought maybe teacher came in, just left it open. So I go back to work and not thinking anything of it. I hear kids running up and down the hallway. So I start going out, chase it, figuring I'm going to kick some kids out of here because they don't belong here. I'm supposed to be the only one in here. There was nobody. So I got talking to the superintendent and I asked her, I said, "Are you aware of what's going on in here? Kids running down the hallway and I'm the only one in the building." She says, "I'm aware of the phantom basketball that bounces in the gym every night." And she says, "Oh no, I'm losing a custodian." I said, "I'm not going anywhere. I chase this stuff. This is what I do." And I said, "Can I set up some cameras in here?" She says, "I don't care as long as you're working." Well, my dad come in the one night, picking up the one camera in the hallway, and I see his hat come flying off his head. And I'm like, yeah, he's just playing a joke on me, trying to get me going. I said that to him. I said, "You're just joking." So we go down the hallway further, pick up the other camera. I'm standing there looking at him. His hands are down to his side. Here goes his hat flying off his head again. And he had a stocking winter hat on. And he
I
says, "See,
mean,
I told you I'm not playing a joke on you."
and I know there's so many theories about the energy that kids have, and you know all the different theories around how energy feeds interactions, but schools and theaters. But most of the theaters that I've been in over the last however many years, those EMF readings, the electromagnetic energy in there is usually off the charts from all of the
Hmm.
equipment. So, anybody that wants to go down a Google rabbit hole and isn't familiar, if they Google fear cage and EMF, I do believe that's a thing in a lot of theaters, but
Hmm.
schools are a whole other. I don't, I don't pretend to know why, um, but that video clip definitely stuck with me, and um, I've seen a few others in the years, and it always seems to be stuff like your dad's hat flipping off, or like a locker banging open, or lights on, like, or very sort of like I don't know, like the kid in class that pulls your pigtail.
Right.
It's that kind
Right.
of stuff. And so it's interesting, but it makes me think twice about wanting to be alone in a school at night. So, you know, I'm glad there
Yeah.
are people like you that chase it.
Yeah. Jimmy Ricker says hello. He's
Hi, Jimmy.
And then we had a question: why are schools haunted?
Well, and I mean, again, if we knew why anything was haunted, right? But
Yeah.
I know, there are a lot of theories about whether it's actual energy like the electromagnetic energy or whether it's psychic energy. And most of the theories that I've heard about schools have to do with the enormous amount of psychic energy that kids
Hmm.
have, um, and that things can live or feed on that and interact. But
Right. And then
um,
you get some of these older schools that were built in like the 1800s, like the one in the town I live in was rebuilt in 1909. It had burnt down in the 1800s. And that place is extremely haunted. So, and they've held funerals in a lot of these schools of the kids that had passed away and stuff like that. And that may have been the last place they seen when they were alive. They were happy in school. So, why not return?
yeah, I mean, I think partly because of like ghost, like horror movie culture and stuff, we sort of got into thinking of like the only places that would be haunted were places where there were tragedies. But like, going back to the Glen house, the Glens didn't die in the house. And so people have said, like, well, why would they be here? And there are theories that like people will go back to the places they were the
Hmm.
happiest.
Yep.
And so like that was Lula's house. It was very much her home. And if somehow they were sort of stuck and able to go back to the place they were happiest, that it might not be just the places you were the most unhappy or that bad things happened. It could truly be the places that you loved and don't want to leave. So,
Yep.
and maybe schools have, if kids were actually happy there, schools have that sort of distinction. But it's definitely interesting.
Yeah. And the one I work at now, that was built in 1888.
Yeah, so you've got a lot of history there.
Yep. And the town of Bramer is just haunted, anyways. You got the Mormon massacre site. It's got a little bit of ties to the Civil War era. So, and then the railroad coming through there.
When you get a lot of people, Cape has a lot of places. So I have a 3-hour tour that I do during the Halloween season, and people have said, why are these old river towns? And there are even theories about like crystalline structures like limestone and how they can trap energy and moving water. And
Yep.
there's so many different theories. And the honest answer is like we don't know, but some places just seem to be more predisposed than others, I guess.
Jimmy says, I love the Glen House. When I leave this world, I'm going back.
Jimmy, dang it, there's enough people there already. It's like there's a waiting list. I'm always
And
afraid that's where I'm going to end up. Like, I've laughed because I feel like the number of things I've had to do climbing in windows on ladders because the alarm system goes haywire and we can't get in. Like, if this house kills me and I end up here, I'm going to be very upset about it. I'll be a poltergeist.
right? And then Jimmy and I will come and investigate, and you'll be messing with us.
Honestly, one of the craziest stories. So, uh, I have said, like now that I'm in my 50s, like when you look back at your life and you're like, man, if I knew that something was going to change my whole world, would I go back and change it? Right.
Right.
So, in my job at the university, our funding was cut. And that was actually the first of the haunted things I did. The University of Missouri St. Louis was doing a ghost hunting class. And it was like maybe the year after Ghost Hunters had debuted on TV. It was very popular. And so the St. Louis Paranormal Research Society was doing a Friday night workshop for UMSL. And they would teach people about the rules and what the
Hmm.
good things you should do, of paranormal investigation. And then they would go, I think at that time they were doing the limp and maybe Demonil, they would take the folks on an investigation on Saturday. And it was earning good revenue, and I needed a revenue driver. So I came back because I'd been up there for a conference or workshop or something. And I asked my boss, like, hey, could I do that here? And they were like, yeah, if you can find somebody. So I actually initially worked with Stephen LaChance, who was
Okay.
involved at
Yep.
that time with the St. Louis Paranormal Research Society. And I asked them to come down. And I'll never forget because they came down with a full team. The stories kind of become uh like a little bit famous on some podcasts and stuff. We had gotten a brand new registration system at the university, and I set it up for online registration on a Friday. And I learned a really valuable lesson because I didn't put a maximum on the class. And I went home for the weekend, came back in on Monday, and there were over 100 people registered. And I was like, oh, crap. And so I had to figure out a way with 15 passenger vans. Like, we did the Friday night class in a lecture hall. That was no big deal. But to
Hmm.
do the ghost hunts, we had to find a bunch of small locations and move people so we wouldn't have great big groups, right? Which was a logistical nightmare. And that's kind of how the broader haunted history tour began, because I had to find all these places. But they came down, and while we were here, there was a nightclub at the time in an old retail building downtown, and the nightclub had two silent partners that were St. Louis Cardinals ball players. And somehow or another, they got word that St. Louis STL PRSS was coming down to do something. And this club was having problems because their time clock was upstairs, and the staff was getting scared because they kept seeing what I now know would be a shadow figure, but like they kept getting scared by something upstairs, and they were not wanting to clock in and clock out at night.
Hmm.
And so somebody knew someone, and when STLPRSS came down, they had been asked to go in and do an investigation while they were here of that building. So they do the Friday night workshop for me, and then they're like, "Hey, do you want to come along?" And I was like, I mean, okay. I had never watched at that point an investigation. And honestly, I love you guys, but didn't know how boring it was, because unless you're
Oh
really
yeah.
into it, it's just, and especially when you've got a lot of electronic equipment, it's just a lot of sitting in the dark and being really quiet, right?
Hmm.
And so this nightclub was interesting because when they redid it, they put a soundproof booth up at the top of it. It was really fancy for its time in Cape. And it had like windows that overlook the dance floor or whatever. It was a VIP room. And one of those Cardinals players had come down, and then one of the other owners or whatever, and they wanted to be upstairs in that soundproof booth and watch the investigation. And so we I watched them like set up all their equipment or whatever. And there was a tucked in area like under the staircase with some leather couches. And so we get everything set up, and we're sitting in the dark, and people just start talking, as they do, waiting for the
Hmm.
equipment to record. And so I think it was Steven that maybe started the conversation, but they had been down here like 2 weeks before, in Jackson, Missouri, which is not really far. And they had gone to a house, and they're in the middle of telling the story. Like, this lady was very upset. She had poltergeist activity in the house. And while they were there, like a bookcase fell over or something, and the house called the police. Now, you have to like understand that at that point, I hadn't really lived any of this. And I was like, uh-huh, okay, whatever. The house called like, oh, good story. But at the same time that he was telling the story, some of the people had come out of the VIP room upstairs, and they were coming down the staircase, and they happened to overhear a piece of this story. And one of the guys was a police officer. and who also did, I guess, security at the nightclub. So he hears this last little snippet of this story, and they come down and they come under the stairs, and he was like, yeah, are you talking about that house? And he gives an address in Jackson, and he's like, oh my God, the guy on duty who had been called came back and told these stories. And basically the police officer ended it up with like, yeah, he was a Catholic who had quit practicing, but I don't think he's missed mass since then, right? But what was crazy to me about that night, there were like really two things that stood out is these two people hadn't met. I'd been with the St. Louis PRSS guys like the whole time. And I cracked up because when they came down here, they had a tech guy, a rabbi, an investigative, guy who was really into ghosts, and a Catholic priest. And it was like one of those old jokes that all walked into a bar, right?
Right.
But but anyway, none of them knew each other. And the fact that the cop was able to fill in parts of the story that he hadn't been, we could hear him coming down the stairs. Like he had no way of knowing those parts of the story. But the other thing that really stuck with me, because of course, then I got curious after that night, right? And I drove over to that location, and it is near a park, and it's just a plain brick ranch house, right?
Hmm.
So in my head, at that point in time, all haunted houses like looked like the Glen House or, Waverly
Right.
or like whatever. And something about like the details of that story and the things that they were all able to say happened that night, and the fact that it was like a 70s or early 80s brick ranch house just really fried my brain, because it was like I want ghost stories to only take place in creepy houses, right? Like not the house next door or, the school or whatever. So all that to go back to like when talking about why would a school be haunted or why would a theater be haunted? What I've learned over the last 20 some years is it's not always the places you would think. And some of the places that seem like they should be aren't, right?
Yeah.
There's totally no real rhyme or reason to the places and spaces that seem to have that activity. Because
Yeah.
that
And I,
house, nobody had died in it. It wasn't built, as far as anyone knew, on an ancient Indian burial ground. Like there was nothing about that house that should have made it be what it was.
right. And some of
So
it is, like Misty was saying earlier, or a place they were traumatized and they don't have closure, the land itself.
yeah, I mean, it's just, and we may never know, but
And she also said hours of patience
yeah, that's
for
the
what
thing
we
I
do.
don't have. I could never be you guys, because you see me, I come in, I'm like, okay, have fun. I'm gonna go read a book, right? Like,
Right. And she also said, but it's worth it for one little EVP or cat ball.
I mean, I think the like with the Glen House, sometimes I feel like that TV show Ghosts.
Mm,
Like I
right.
sometimes I think like that's my life. So I'm not like I'm actively trying to look away. But I'm glad that there's you guys that are like still want to find out, because
Oh yeah, and I've done this for 31 years now, so there's not much I haven't seen, but we do a lot of residential cases, and that is a whole different ball game in itself. Doing residential cases than going to like the Glen House or Missouri State. A lot more different energies with people and mental illnesses. It's just a whole different thing when they're experiencing something in their home. And we'll go out there, they'll say they're having this going on, that going on. We'll be sitting there for hours and not have anything go on. A lot of times my team members will start falling asleep. They're,
well, and I think too, in an era of like TV production, that some people have an idea that something always happens, or it happens in a much quicker timeline, or they don't realize how much audio or video people are combing through, um, to find what they do find.
Hmm.
Uh, you know, so I personally know I don't have the patience to do it, but I'm very glad that there are people and who document and are meticulous about it. So,
Yeah, because I
um,
mean, you figure like us, if we're doing somebody's house, a lot of times we're there for 12 to 15 hours straight. And that's DVR cameras running constant, full time, your audio recorders. So, yeah, it is a lot to comb through. You need a lot of coffee to get through because you're just sitting there watching video that nothing's going on, and you're feeling the back of your eyelids getting heavy that you want to go to sleep there in the middle of it. So,
well, and I mean, I'm still a big believer, and people are sometimes shocked, by that know me when I say some of this stuff, but like I still struggle with what you should mess with and what you shouldn't.
right.
And even just as a tour guide, just telling ghost stories, or taking people to places and spaces, or giving tours at the Glen House. I mean, your dad and I talked about, I mean, I always wear protective jewelry,
Hmm.
much like you all. I have, tattoos with that have certain meaning, because I do believe that, and have experienced that you can bring things with you,
Yep.
um, and whether you believe that or not, I do think there's a little bit of danger for people who go in and don't protect themselves. Um, that's and I have been places, with tour guides that are totally sort of non-believers, that are in and out of some
Mhm.
really bad places, and have a lot of bad things happening in their lives. And I just want to say, and I have said to people like, hey, do you have a do you have a faith? Do you have a crucifix or something that you believe in? Like, maybe start carrying that, because
Yep.
regardless of what you believe about whether or not these places are haunted, what you're telling me is your life has gotten exponentially worse since you've been doing these things. I'm gonna just say you might be carrying some things home with you. Maybe tuck that symbol of some sort of faith into your pocket. It's not gonna hurt anything. Might
Right.
help, you know.
Right. I mean,
um,
I got a video that I use for educational purposes when I do lectures and stuff, and it was one of my team members in a haunted movie theater in Marshall. She was sitting in the front row. I'm sitting middle row back behind her. Her husband's in the other row towards the back. She gets up, thinks she's got something in her eye, and she gets up, goes to her husband. He checks. We didn't know this was going on at the time. She sits back down in the same chair she was sitting in. Next thing you know, her face starts morphing to somebody else, and she's taking her thumb and she's just digging her face open with her thumb.
uh,
And
yeah.
she wasn't wearing no protective, nothing. She didn't
Well,
believe in it. And when I showed her that video and I showed it to her husband, she does not go out on any more paranormal investigations. That did it for her.
and I mean, I've had arguments with colleagues because, again, work in education, and people have varying levels of belief, right? I mean, scientists, like, we know we know the placebo effect is real,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
So even if it's all in your head and having something helps that, does it hurt you? I mean, I'm big on, you know, your when your dad was when I lifted up my sleeves, I saw him kind of laugh because the things that I wear, but this stuff never comes off, and people laugh. But because I do so much of this, like
Mm-hmm.
you're, I don't leave the house without certain things. They'll always be on my person, even if it's just a mental tool for me where I feel better. It
Yep.
doesn't hurt anything, and
Right.
um, but that is the one tip, especially people that are super interested in all of this, because I see a lot of people kind of wander into the interest in the paranormal, whether it's playing with tools, pendulum,
Yep.
tarot, Ouija, whatever, all good, but be safe out there, kids.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's why he clenched your bracelets and stuff for you and blessed them for you, so you're well protected. And but you are right. People play with this stuff. They think it's a thrill, and just like Misty says here, you're so right. More should take investigating more seriously. You can have fun, but it's no joke. It shouldn't be treated like a jump scare. I mean,
Yeah,
and she is right. I mean, the darker stuff is real. It's rare, but it's real, and it's a perfect opportunist. It lies and waits until it finds its perfect opportunity, and then it starts to show its ugly head, and then it starts affecting your life and starts tearing your family apart, your friends, starts making you sick. And a lot of people don't realize that. I mean, I've seen people's eyes roll in the back of their heads, upside down crosses get scratched in their neck, and it's no joke. You need people need to take it seriously and not use it as their clickbait, fame, fortune,
yeah.
jump scares. It's not a game.
And I think, if you'd ask early 20s me, I probably would have scoffed at like some of this
Right,
and thought,
right,
eh, you know, but again, I mean, and also we live in a pretty religious area, so it's like I don't necessarily think that this is all Satan, or not everything is a
right.
demon, and
No,
like I don't think that being interested in this is necessarily against faith, or but in the same way, it's I don't think every time I get in my car I'm going to have an accident, but I put my seatbelt on anyway,
right.
right?
Yep,
And so that's sort of the way um, that I view it, and even in the Glen House, that is one thing that as people come in and we train them, again, we're a museum, and not everyone is comfortable giving a ghost tour. So those folks that just want to talk about the history and do the normal things you would do at a historic house museum, we don't make them,
right.
do a ghost tour, and there's certainly a place for that. But for all the people that spend a great deal of time there and have ever kind of gotten scared by something, that's a conversation I always try to gently have. Like, when you're here, like if you have, something that of to protect yourself, even if it just makes you feel better, maybe wear that. Like,
Yep, exactly.
not a requirement, but it might make you feel better, and it might be a good thing to do when you're here. So anytime
Oh,
somebody goes out into spaces looking, I think
right.
that's wise.
Jimmy says, I think the show we done up at the Glen House was great, and the Glen House looked great in videos.
She's so pretty in videos. I said she's like the girl. I am not that girl. Like, I am not the one who looks better in pictures, but the house, she's that girl that, like, through a camera, that house just
Yeah,
shines for some
yeah,
reason.
it does. It's a beautiful place.
It pops. So, um, we've we've had a lot of stuff filmed there, not just spooky stuff, but all kinds of different commercials, media pieces, whatever. And almost every time a videographer looks, they're like, wow, these colors look really bright. So I think it likes to have its picture taken.
Right. And another thing your staff could do, also the ones that don't and they get scared for the ghost stuff, just tell them to acknowledge them. Just tell them, say, hey, look, I'm here to give a tour. Please do not scare me. And they'll probably respect the wishes and not show themselves to her, knowing that they're scaring her.
And it's funny, like this group I have now is they're pretty solid, but I also do see that as society gets more comfortable, um, people are more comfortable doing that. There was a really big generational thing. Some of those folks just the comfort level wasn't there, and it just wasn't societally acceptable to say you had something happen to you, right?
Right.
Um, so now, I mean, I even think to be able to talk about it with somebody else, that something strange happened, and I'm the first one to admit there are days if I'm there by myself and I have to give tours and I walk in that back door and it feels wrong, I'll sit on the front porch until somebody comes. There are just days when I feel like the
Mm-hmm.
house doesn't want company. And I certainly have days like that myself. Um, Normally, when you bring a tour in and you start talking about, like, especially a normal tour about, the fixtures and the build date and the remarkable architecture, that kind of stuff, then it's pretty calm. Um, so, but I don't need to be in the space if the space isn't welcoming.
Right.
Um, so that's really and I've said that to other people, like, go sit on the front porch, read a book, do whatever, and unless you
Mm-hmm.
have somebody come in, because you know you don't have to be in there. Like,
Right. I always use that line from Ghost Hunters that Jason always says, when in doubt, get the hell out.
yeah, that's pretty much, yeah. If it doesn't feel like it wants you there, take that as a hint and just head right on
Yep.
out the door until you need to be in there. So
Yep.
there are days I've had perfectly good intentions of like vacuuming or doing whatever if there's nobody there. And from the minute I walk through the threshold, I'm like, nope, today's not the day.
Yep.
So we'll do it another day.
Especially they were human once, so they still go through the human emotions and everything that
Mhm.
we do. So maybe to them they weren't feeling good that day, so they didn't want nobody there making noise or doing activities in the home.
And, again, it is different because this is a place I can say these things because this is a place that I have long-standing familiarity with. I know it's different when you're doing an investigation or something. You walk in
Mm-hmm.
and you don't know the space. Um, that can also be good as far as being objective, I would imagine. That's
Mm-hmm.
why, when I worked with you all, I never tell people when they come in much of anything unless I'm asked, just because different people have different methods and
Yep.
ways that they like to investigate. Some people don't want to know anything and then they want to come back afterward with what they find and then get the history to see if what they find.
Right.
So, I'm pretty careful about what I say when an investigative group is in, but it is interesting to get the impressions that people have. Um, and what I think is interesting is when a number of people have similar stories. There are a lot of things about like places like the Glen House that get published. And so somebody could read them and, of course, say, well, this happened to me, and it would be very similar. But there are a lot of little things that we don't talk about as much. So, like the feeling of being touched in the children's room, and like it tends to be down low, like where a child would touch you. By and large, people will describe it as like not being ghostly. I
Mm-hmm.
think people expect that it's going to be like cold, chilly fingers or whatever. It really feels like a child is touching you. And so we don't talk about those kinds of things. They're not in books and in articles. So when people come in, one person in your group this last time is pregnant and she had that experience.
Yeah.
but I've heard that almost to the detail experience multiple times from multiple people. So those are the things that are always interesting
Right.
when they happen, and when you're on this side of it where people have told you that stuff, and kind of like back to that story of in the Jackson house, those people not
Yeah.
knowing each other, it's not out there. So
Well, yeah, even in that one bedroom when Jonathan was under Estes, it said something about Eric's girlfriend about having a baby across the box.
one of my favorite stories with those, there's a house in Cape. It's a business now, but at the time that I went in, uh, it was a paranormal investigation group, and actually a student group from the university that was recording a Halloween radio show episode. And they had an Estes, and they had it in what would have been the kitchen of this old house. And, most of the time, really, those machines are not supposed to say phrases, they just kick out a
Hmm.
word. But probably 15 times that night in the kitchen, the box said fried chicken. And it was funny at the time. It wasn't funny because it just, because those, they sound kind of robotic, but fried
Hmm.
chicken, like, to explain to somebody why at like 3 in the morning, this weird voice that just keeps going, fried chicken, was scary is kind of hard, but
Right.
like if you're there, number one, they're not supposed to really say phrases or whatever, but it was fried chicken over and over and over. So somewhere I think there's a ghost. And what's fun to me is like now that is a restaurant, and I don't they don't have fried chicken, but they do grilled chicken. So hopefully
Right.
hopefully somewhere he's happy with his chicken choices, because, you know,
Right.
somebody wanted some fried chicken. That was my takeaway from that night. But it was just interesting that they had a couple of the machines set up in different places in the house, but and for them to repeat the same word is not really a normal occurrence either. But it's like, okay, we get the point. You want some fried chicken.
Right.
Fun.
Yeah, it's amazing some of the things they come out with and stuff like that. And but yeah, I mean, like you said with the EMF in that house, I use a millimeter. I don't use a K2. I do not trust a K2. They give so many false readings. So I use my millimeter. And usually when there's a high EMF, my millimeter will pick it up, and that thing stayed flat throughout the whole night in that house, even with that knob and tube wiring.
And it that just is it's a weird thing. I mean, like I said, they'll kick up in my house, and the construction, it's either got to be the plaster or something, but it does make it nice because it's really easy to get good baseline readings. And I've learned in the last umpteen bajillion years that that's not normal in a house of that age, to because then that makes using those really unpredictable when you've got rates that fluctuate, you
Yep.
know, which is what I've seen to be standard with knob and tube wiring. So, um, you know,
Yeah, especially I used to work as an electrician for a little while, and been in houses with that knob and tube, and it's spliced everywhere, all over the place, in walls and up in the ceilings, and
well, and when Ghost Hunters was here, we did have, so, there are a lot of years of stories, but to condense the stories of the bells down, the bells do not currently work because after that incident years ago, they started to be so haywire all the time. And finally, my nerves couldn't take it, and it was causing problems, that we cut the wiring. So the wiring is cut, but sometimes the bells forget that the wiring is cut and they'll ring anyway. So when Ghost Hunters filmed, the bells went off, but they travel typically with like an electrical engineer and a bunch of people to do pretty exhaustive baselines. And they didn't. add that in the show. And one of the things he said, because the knob and tube has that like coating on it that
Yep.
degrades. And so he said it could be degraded in the wall and like cross arcing,
Mm-hmm.
which makes it very high fire risk. And he's like, technically, you probably should have a fire if that's happening, but it's not outside of the realm of possibility. So they were able at least to like debunk it enough that they weren't comfortable with putting it in the show. So, but it's still one of those things that, it's like, especially with how low the EMF bleeds off of it, like
Yeah.
it's just weird to me that it'll occasionally just decide it'll go through spurts. It'll have like a day when it'll go off multiple times and then you try to recreate it and you can't. And 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 it's almost to the point like the first time it does it, you're like, did I hear that? Um, but again, it's one of those things that the more attention you pay to it, I sort of feel like the more repetition you get.
Yep.
So, um, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. It is a fascinating story. I'm always glad to allow people to investigate. We're a 501c, we're a nonprofit. We hold the house in trust for the community, just in the same way that people are very interested in the what I call straight history, and we try to oblige that. We also try to work as best we can with groups like yours, because we're holding the house in trust for the community, whatever the community's interest in it is, as long as it's not harmful to the house or the integrity of the
Mm-hmm.
organization. So, if other folks want to come in, um, we sort of do a reference system. We usually at this point ask for a reference. So, can you give us other folks that would sort of vouch for you?
Right.
And then we do ask for a donation, and then we have those basic rules of conduct. Don't put your feet on the furniture. Don't climb in the beds. Behave like you've got some sense, and no
Yep.
taunting or use of you know don't try to conjure things into the house because we're full up. We don't. Sorry, Jimmy. We don't need any more ghosts.
Yeah, this was probably about a year ago. There was a couple that went to the 1889 McIntyre Villa and actually left a mess for Stephanie there and destroyed the location. And she's nice enough to let people rent that place out. She don't even stay there when people come. And for people just to do that, it's very disrespectful to the location, to the spirits of that location, and even the new owners. And you
we
see a lot more history getting destroyed because of it.
we've truly been lucky. You're always going to have one or two folks, and unfortunately, if you have somebody bad enough, they can ruin it for everybody. But
Yeah.
we haven't had that severity. But we've had a few people that I've had to give a talking to, um, and we are generally on site with people unless, if we've got a long-standing relationship or a relationship where it's super comfortable. But for the most part, you'll have someone, most of the time we'll be in the carriage house, and let you kind of do your own thing, but we're there to kind of keep an eye
Mm-hmm.
and make sure. But for me, and I think because I've been doing this long enough, I have a pretty good sense. And, you know, some of the things that you shouldn't have to tell people, but like really, if you're drinking during an investigation or doing anything else, you're
Yeah.
probably not serious about it. Um, and, those are the types of things that obviously are going to corrupt your investigation. It tells us a lot about whether you're taking it seriously and being conscientious. On the flip side, like I don't care if somebody has a beer or a glass of wine, but it just gives me some insight as to sort of how much we need to watch. But for
Yeah.
the most part, I find that people in the paranormal community do take it pretty seriously. Um, Generally are history lovers, so part of why a lot of people get interested in the ghost is because they're interested legitimately in the history, and that most people have some sort of faith or belief and are
Hmm.
gentle with the spirits because of those beliefs. So, and that makes them gentle with the property. So,
Yep.
because I've had a lot of people ask over the years, what it's like, and um, because I think there are people and still out there in the media and whatnot who give all folks who do this a bad name.
Yep.
And so, as other places and sites consider whether or not they would allow someone to come in and do this, they're always curious. But I have had more positive experience than negative experiences with groups.
Yep. Jimmy says, "Oh, come on. One more won't hurt."
Listen, he's a rabble rouser.
Oh,
He'll
I
be
know he
bringing
is.
he'll be bringing his afterlife whiskey, having a party.
Yeah, you got to watch him.
That whiskey doesn't count, by the way. That's a separate thing.
Right.
uh well, I hope people were interested in what we had to talk about.
Oh, yeah, definitely. People want to get a hold of you to book paranormal investigation or go on a tour. How can they get a hold of you guys?
They can either look at the website, which is glenhouse.org. Glen has two N's. Or they can reach out to me. My number is the one on social media. It's if you go to the Facebook page. Somebody stole the Facebook page a long time ago. So when you're looking for the Glen House on Insta or Facebook, the historic Glen House. If you Google it, you'll find it. But and my number is 573-587-4248. Sorry, I don't have a snappy Glen House phone number. Um, but you can reach me that way. So, and if you do a quick search, you find tons of stuff. I think there's quite a bit of evidence out there. There's quite a bit of EVPs and stuff on YouTube, stuff on Amazon Prime. Um, so there's a
Yep.
lot to dig through as far as research.
And then they can check out our video on Ken 10 Paranormal's YouTube. Check out ScareNetwork Outlaws Paranormal's show for there. And then
Yeah,
Ghost Hunter. And then
they
Ghost
did a
Hunters.
nice job. That Scare Network, that two-part piece was really well done. Thank you guys.
Yeah, Billy's awesome at what he does. He's a pretty awesome filmmaker, and we're going to be doing some work with him as well. So, which we can't
Well,
wait on that.
it's always nice whenever it's treated with respect. And having worked with, we've worked with so many different media companies that you never necessarily you don't know what the end product's going to look like till you see it. So it's
Right.
always a little bit of a scary kind of a leap of faith thing. But
But
we,
we're going to go ahead and wrap up the show. If you want to hang backstage for a minute, and I'll be with you in just a few minutes.
yes,
Thank
sir.
and thank you for coming on the show tonight.
You're welcome. Nice to meet everybody virtually. All
We'll see you in a minute.
right.
Thank you guys for tuning in tonight. I hope you guys found the show awesome and informational. Definitely check out the Glen House. Here's another picture of it. Just check it out online. Check out some videos. The Ghost Hunters episode, Outlaw Paranormals on Scare Networks episode, and check out Ken 10 Paranormal YouTube page for the investigation of the Glen House with us. with that being said, everybody stay safe out there in this cold. Stay home. Don't go out in that snowstorm because it's pretty nasty. And remember, if you're being bullied in the paranormal field, you do have a voice. Nobody's better than anybody in this field. We're all after the same common goal. So with that being said, God bless everybody, and we will see you all next week. Same time, same channel. And we're